Okay, so it's 5. I will start the kick off the presentation for today. So hello everyone, welcome to our second event of this year. I would like to thank the audience present today as well as the core team members who did a wonderful job in making this event possible. But due to the rough time that the world is facing because of the pandemic, we are conducting this event virtually today and hope you guys are well and staying safe. Please do observe all sanitary precaution as well. So let me now briefly introduce you to our topic of today. We will have an introduction on the core teams and the user group on our user group, NewGM. Then Vidush will present on Blazor PWA. After that, Danish will present on what's new in C# 9, the new features available. And then we will end with a podcast and a question and answers session. To begin with, please give a big round of applause to our core team members. We have Preeti, the founder of NewGM. We have Satish, Danesh, and Favish, our technical guides and facilitators who prepare the live streaming of this event. Next, we have Yudish and myself, Kavya. If you are passionate about .NET technologies and want to discover its potential, which can be used in your future project, please feel free to join us by logging to the Meetup platform and search for .NET User Group Mauritius. Well, our first speaker for today is Mr. Vidush. He is a speaker at the Developers Conference and GDG as well. Some technologies that he is fond of are web development, mobile, cloud development, and the topic of today he will present on Blazor PWA. So Vidush, the stage is yours. You can share your screen and start the presentation.
All right. So hello everyone. This is actually my first time presenting in the NewGem Meetup. So really glad to be here and to be part of this. It's a really great initiative. So I'll just kick off with my slides, and it's going to be a very introductory session, not much live coding, but enough to get anyone started on PWA. So a little bit about me. I've done quite a few things in terms of technology. Actually, you guys can have a look at my GitHub page. Maybe I'll show you guys towards the end. And the things that I'm very passionate about are C#, TypeScript, .NET, and mobile web development. It's quite a few. Moving on to our session for today. So I want to talk about Blazor, but more about progressive web app. It's a concept that's been around for a while, progressive web app, and a lot of people are familiar with it, but it kind of happens behind the scenes and people are not even aware that they may be using a progressive web app. So we start from square one or square zero, true developer style. Progressive web apps are basically applications that are running on your machine, on your device, so your phone, your tablet, your desktop, your laptop, and it's using modern web browser technologies in order to provide you with a very native, near native user experience. So because it's using web technologies, web browser technologies, it is cross-platform by design. And this was a big focus of having a progressive web application. You may actually have already used it in the past. Some common sites or applications that makes use of this is Pinterest, Twitter, Uber, Spotify, and there are a lot more. So in a bit, you'll see how you can identify what is a progressive web app. Is the application you're on right now a progressive web app or not? There's an easy way. Right. So what do you need to develop a progressive web application? As impressive as the technology is, you actually don't need much. You basically need three things. You need to be using HTTPS. This is one of the requirements for having a progressive web application. So that's mainly for security. You need to have at least one, but normally you need to have at least one service worker. So the service worker is a JavaScript file that basically contains the logic to be able to act as an offline or native web application. Do you expect some things from an application that's not running in your browser? You expect it to work offline. You expect it to be seamless. This kind of thing is helped by the service worker. And the final one is the manifest file. So the manifest file, this is a common term in mobile development, for instance. It basically provides metadata that describes this website. It describes it as an application. We have to basically take the website and translate it into a native application on your device. So there are things that are needed. What's the name of the application? What's the icon you want to use? Different sizes of icons for different devices. This kind of things, it's not readily available in all websites. So you have to provide a manifest file that then your web browser is going to use in order to identify how this should look like on your device as a native application. And that's all. If you have a website today already and you're already using HTTPS, if you create your own service worker and you create your own manifest file, you are basically almost on the level where you can call this a progressive web application. So yeah, sounds fancy. But as I mentioned, the implementation itself is very simple. And if you're creating a progressive web application from scratch, a lot of the IDEs that you use, like Visual Studio, for instance, will already add those files for you, a basic version of the file. So now Blazor, how does Blazor fit into this? Blazor is there are different ways to describe it. We have official documentation that gives a very how can I put it, politically correct description of Blazor. But in an easier way to understand what it is, you can think of Blazor as a React app or a Next app, a Vue app, for instance. So these kinds of applications are very close to what Blazor offers. Note that Blazor does not intend to replace those applications. It does some things differently, but in terms of the developer experience, it's very close. If I had to describe Blazor in itself in the Microsoft ecosystem, I would say it's the evolution of web forms, probably. Web forms in Microsoft technologies is one of the things that was closest to what Blazor offers now. So Blazor then comes in two flavors. We have Blazor, basically Blazor server-side application, which is technically just a website, just a normal website, but developed in Blazor. It uses a signaler connection that remains constantly active. And basically, every time you're interacting with the website via this signaler connection, it can connect to your server, your Blazor server, and decide what to do next and what to serve you next. It all happens on the server side. And that's why it's called Blazor server side. Everything is happening on the server side. Almost nothing is happening on the client side except rendering the page in front of you. So that's why I mentioned here that this is counterintuitive in terms of a PW use case. For a PWA use case, a PWA application, progressive web application, you want it to act as a native application. So you don't want to be bound to a server. You don't want to receive 404 not found and this kind of errors every time and again. So you want it to act as a normal application. You need to forget that there is a server behind, that there is anything running on server side. That's the idea. So because Blazor server side is made to run on server side, there is not much of a use case to make it into a PWA. You can make it a PWA, but what's the use? So maybe it might be just for the hype. It's a real thing. A lot of the application would do it just to get on the hype, but logically speaking, there is not much use case. On the other hand, there is Blazor WebAssembly, which uses WebAssembly, which is a common term today, especially with modern browsers. And WebAssembly what it does, it's exactly as I mentioned, it leverages the technologies on modern browser to be able to execute code locally on your machine. So you don't need a constant server connection. You will only connect to the server when you need to fetch something. Classic behavior for an application. Right. So how do you get started? So yeah, the uninitiated would use Visual Studio, which you just open your Visual Studio, create a new project, look for Blazor, and then select on Blazor and select your options. Very graphical user interface driven. But on the other hand, because we are fancy, we can use the terminal. Blazor is an ASP.NET Core, and it builds on top of ASP.NET Core. So we get to use the .NET CMD command, and you can just say .NET new Blazor WASM, Blazor WebAssembly. That basically defines that you want to create a new Blazor WebAssembly project, and you want to output it to this. That's your project name. I'm calling mine passion fruit, and then you give the options of what do you want to be pre-installed or pre-configured for you. In this case, I put in PWA as a flag, so it's going to be off the bat a PWA application and hosted. So basically, I'm going to also have a server application in my project. We'll have a look at the code in a bit. So now the next thing, I did mention 3 things that you need in a PWA application. You need HTTPS. That's pre-configured. When you're creating a new Blazor application, it's already HTTPS enabled. You need a manifest file. So this is what you can expect to be in a manifest file. You will have the name of your application, right? Ours is passion fruit. We have a short name. On Android and maybe iOS, I think it's called a slug. So basically, that's a different name for your application that the system uses. It's the name that, if I'm not mistaken, would appear in your app menu. So that's the short name or the slug. You have a start URL. So once you open the application locally, where should it go as the first page? The display settings, so do you want it as a standalone application or not? Background color, theme color. So the background color would be when it's loading, what should be the default background color and such. And those are just configuration for when the application is opening, when it's acting as an application, what should the design be like? And you even have the icon as well that would be used in the application. We'll get to see that in practice, I think, right after. So next, there we go. So next, we need a service worker. That one is a bit tough. So I'm going to exit the presentation just to go into the code that we have. So I already have a Blazor web application here that I created, as I mentioned, passion fruit. And as you can see, it's a normal Blazor application. So I have a shared library for things that are shared across the different projects. I have a server-side project, so basically for all server operations. I have a client-side project. And inside the client-side project, you will notice I have a root. So this is very common for people who have worked with .NET technologies. This is a very common layout. Inside the root, that's basically the root is what's going to be on your user's computer. That's what they are going to access first. And that's why in here we also have the manifest JSON and we have an index HTML. A quick note on how Blazor works. Basically, it loads the index HTML first, and then it's going to also load your Blazor application. And you can think of it as everything that comes out of your application is going to be just injected here instead of the loading. So if I open this manifest.json, you notice that we've been through this, but one important point is the start URL is just the current folder. So by default, it's going to go for the index HTML. And now the service worker. Actually, there are 2 of them. If I open this one, there's not much going on here. This is for development purposes. So there is nothing in the service worker. Again, backtracking on the service worker's role is to provide all the logic that is going to make your web application act as a native application. So if you want offline support, if you want to cache some items locally, this kind of logic would go here. But in development, you don't really need that. So this is the development version of a service worker, not much. But on the other hand, you have a second one here called service worker published. now things gets interesting. So here you can see there are functions defined as what should happen when you're installing this web application. You're installing it as an application on your device. What should happen when it's activated? What should happen when I try to fetch something from the application? There is a lot of things that are going on here. There is even caching that is involved. We won't go much into this file, but indeed, this is a very basic file that you can have in your project to turn your project into a PWA. Okay, so going back to the slides, if I get the correct one, yeah, this is the one. All right. Okay, so before we go into the codes, let's say you already invested time, money, and effort into developing an ASP.NET Core application. You already have that, and now suddenly Blazor comes along, and now suddenly we have PWA that's like raging everywhere, and you want to go PWA as well, but you already have a web application. As I mentioned, it doesn't need to be a .NET Core application. Any web application that you have, as long as you're sure you have HTTPS, which I did not mention here, you just also have to ensure you have your manifest.json and a service worker. Okay, so actually, let's do a quick demo of what that Blazor application would look like. I did not tweak it too much, left it pretty much as it would be boilerplate. So I have my project, and I'm just going to start it up. And that's it kicking off. And you have a normal web application that opens up. It did open up completely. Boom. So you have a very normal basic web application. This is the default boilerplate that you would get, by the way, not modified. So nothing new so far. But then in Edge, in Microsoft Edge, it's this way, but all the other most of the other browsers, I think it's similar. You have a small icon that appears here that says install passion fruit. It's not going to say passion fruit for your application. It's gonna have a less awesome name. But here, this is what converts it into a native application. So I just have to click on this icon to say install this on my desktop, and then I can click on install. Once I click on install, I opened up on my second screen. Here you go. The exact same website that I just opened up is now a full-fledged application. Let me just hide this so that we don't get confused and expand this. And you are no longer in your web browser. This is the magic of PWA. It's actually using the web browser technology. It's using Edge, Microsoft Edge technology behind to be able to power this application. If you installed it on your device and you did the application install via Chrome, it's going to use your Chrome browser in order to render this. So it's all happening in the background using your browser's technology in order to render this as a normal application. So it works. I have my counter. I have a fetch data here, loading, fetching the data from the server. And, damn, I have an unhandled error. Check something. My bad. I will start actually I need to start the server application because that's where I have my server logic. I don't think it's going to be able to render anything unless I start my passion fruit server application. But this gives me an opportunity. So I will have to uninstall the previous one to be able to do this fresh. So if you open your start menu, let's just ignore what's happening in the background for now, and you try to find it, you will see that passion fruit has been installed here as an application. If I open it, I already turned off the project. My bad. We'll get to that again. So, where is it? Passion fruit application. I want to uninstall it. The reason why it's not opening, I already turned off the server and restarted it on a new endpoint. So this other website is no longer accessible. And this is actually proof that this is still a web application running on your desktop. So I want to uninstall this to install the fresh one that actually works. You will see that this has been installed here as a normal application. It even has a version number. And I can just go ahead and uninstall it. I get a small pop-up that you guys can see just to ask me if I want to uninstall it. I clicked on OK. And if I refresh this, you will see that if I go to P, no P, passion fruit is gone. Okay, so now I launched this new one. It's on a new endpoint. It's loading from the server, and for this one, you will notice that fetch data actually works. This is in the browser, and again, from the browser, I can install passion fruit app and install it. And actually, you can even notice here it's saying where it's getting the data from. There are limitations to this. You can actually access some very web-like things here in terms of if you want to open it in your browser from which you installed it from the get-go, and so on and so forth. So this is what you can expect in terms of a Blazor web application. This is a hyperlink that I just clicked. It actually brings you to Microsoft's documentation on Blazor. I have a couple of more links in my presentation window where Microsoft provides you with, there we go, with a tutorial, which does not take that long, just in order to build this kind of application from scratch. And this is the official documentation that you can also have a read on. I kind of summarized it in this presentation as well, but this describes what you need. And as you can see, it clearly says you need to have HTTPS in order to be using the Blazor PWA or any PWA. Okay, so moving on again with the slides. All right, service worker. So I did say let's go into the service worker a bit later on. So the service worker has the manifest file is one of the easiest one. You just set a few properties, not much to think about. But the service worker is one of the more complicated one because you need to define how your application is going to act, and you need to define when and what should it be caching offline. What kind of files do you want to keep offline? Those cached files that are offline, this is what's going to be used when you don't have an internet connection. This is part of the reason why right now, when my server was down and I tried to open the application, nothing was loading. You just got a loading message because I was using the development version of the application. And if we go back to the code, you will see that the development version has no caching mechanism. I am currently running on a debug mode, so it's development mode. And that's the reason why when I opened it, nothing would load because it did not cache anything. It did not keep anything offline. This application is purely dependent on the server. On the other hand, if I was using the release mode, it would be using this file, in which case you can see that it tries to cache a few things. It tries to cache any DLLs that you have. It caches HTML files, JavaScript files. So everything that usually would load on the client side, it's cached in there. And that's how it's going to act as a native application. And the only time it will be stuck on loading or will not be able to proceed will be if it's trying to fetch some kind of data. Of course, you can take control of that as well. So if your fetch fails, what should it do? How should it respond? What kind of error it should show? So this is a bit complicated to get right, especially for someone who is just moving to PWA. So if we go back to the question on you already developed, so it would be this slide, you already developed an ASP.NET Core application. Now you want to go PWA, how do you go about and do that? You can create those two things manually, fine, but then you will face problems with the service worker. So that's when the community got your back. So there are a lot of people who have worked on it. There are very boilerplate default service workers that you can just use. It's not going to do any magic. It's not going to be specially tailor-made for your application, but it's going to offer the basics, like caching HTML files, going to offer the basic functionalities. So one of those packages that you can use is actually called Web Essentials ASP.NET Core PWA. It's a third-party package. I believe I have a project running here that is using actually this package. Manage NuGet packages installed. There we go. So it's a third-party package that was developed by someone called Mads. Cool name. And basically what it does is it's going to set up the service worker support. It's going to set up the manifest JSON support. You will still have to make sure that you created your manifest file as I have in this project, and you provided everything you need. But it's enough to get you started. And then you can typically you can convert your existing web application, a .NET Core application, into a PWA. So before closing off, I will now talk a bit more about Blazor itself. This session was more towards PWA, but we can touch a bit on how Blazor works. So as I mentioned before, Blazor is very similar to something like React or Vue. Or if you have used web forms, then this is going to be very familiar. So if we start with this index page, it's a really simple one. There's not much Blazor going on. Well, the first part about Blazor is this. So we are specifying the route that would access this page just here, directly in the file itself, contrary to something like an MVC pattern or an MVC framework. Pattern is the right word, actually. So an MVC pattern, you would have a controller that would then be connected to a view, and then be connected to a model that is going to feed a view. So that's what you expect in an MVC application. So basically what would happen is on your view file, so on your index HTML file, you don't have any logic. It's connected to a controller, and all of the logic is separated, put inside the controller. In Blazor, it's less in that direction and more towards the web forms and modern JavaScript-based frameworks, UI frameworks and such. So you can have some logic already in your app. The second thing you can see is here, it has support for components. So in this case, I'm actually using a component called survey prompt. And if I go to shared, you'll notice that I have a survey prompt.razor here. Classic HTML, a small touch of Blazor here with the @title to basically, this is how it does interpolation to put string inside your HTML. And you have this small snippet here where you can add any code you want. So this is one component, and I'm simply just using the component here, supplying it with a title. And once I do that, inside this component here, it has a title, so it can use it. All of these are actually components, each and every one. So you even have referencing. This would translate, if I was writing in JavaScript, this would translate to something like import layout component base from something. Not sure where it's going to get it from. This is kind of what you expect in a React application, for instance. But this is replaced here by @inherits. So moving on to another file, for instance, the counter file, there's a little bit more logic here. So first off, the root, again, we know on which endpoint I'm going to access this file, the basic HTML of the file, and then I have this interpolation here. So there is a variable somewhere, we are going to get to the code in a bit, but there is a variable somewhere in this file called current count, and it's going to find that variable and display it here. And on the button, I have on click. You may notice or may not. I'm going to zoom in. There's a small @ here, just to basically say this is going to be linked to a Blazor code. And I say on click, call my increment count function. So now in the code, here is the current count, which is going to be displayed here. And this is my function. So basically, you can code your entire application and your logic, everything in one place. In the same file. You can still split it. It's completely your choice. You can split the logic and have it separate, but Blazor was built in a way that you can also have everything in your file here. So everything related to your UI in a single place. Now, if you go to something a bit more complicated, it's the fetch data. Again, same principle. First thing first, I have the endpoint, fetch data. So on this endpoint, I actually want to go and fetch data from an HTTP source. So I have the using passionfruit shared here so that I can use my shared components. And then I injected, so imported in JavaScript terms, let's say, an HTTP client so that I can make HTTP requests. In JavaScript or TypeScript, that would be something like import Axios or import fetch. Well, I think fetch is inbuilt, so you don't have to import it. Okay, so I have some of my HTML here, and then again, every time I want to use code inside my HTML, I just prefix it with the little magical at. And I now have a section of code. So if I don't have any forecast, just show loading. Else, if I do have forecasts, so I do have items to show, then show it as a table. And again, interpolation here. And inside my code here, you can see that I have my forecast array. So it's going to show the forecast. And on initialized async, so when the page is opened, this is, you will see this is not called anywhere. This is what we call a life cycle. One of the, I don't want to say hook because it's not a hook, but it's one of the life cycle methods or functions that is going to be executed on initialized. So it's going to go and try to fetch the weather forecasts. And I think this represents a lot of the scenarios that you would face when developing a web application. So this is a bit about JSON, a little bit about PWA, and I believe that's the end of my session. Really introductory session to get you guys started on how simple Blazor actually is. The name may be impressive, but the code is not that hard, and how you can easily get started with PWA using that technology. I'm Vidush Nama, and you guys can reach me at github.com/vnsnippets. If you guys have any questions, I can take them now.
Thank you, Vidush, for this wonderful presentation. We will wait for some times now for waiting for some audience question in regards to Blazor PWA. Please, Favish, let me know if we have some question on behalf of the audience, please. Okay, we wait some more. It seems that we don't have any question right now. In case there are some questions, you can still revert back to Vidush via LinkedIn, email, or any other platform. So let's move on to our next presenter. It's Mr. Danesh, also a speaker at the Developers Conference and GDG Google User Group. And technologies that he has been working on are automation, Azure solution, and AI as well. And the topic of today will be the what's new with C#9. So Danesh, you can take the stage and start your presentation.
Thank you, Javier, for introducing myself. So let me give myself a bit of introduction. So I'm Danish, and most of you are very familiar with me in various tech conference and user group meetup. So most of you know me quite well, and so I don't want to make such a big tagline on myself. So let's get deep dive with C#9.
Okay.
Right. What's new with C#9? Well, Microsoft recently released the .NET 5, which is a combination of .NET Core and the old .NET framework together with one single framework, .NET 5. And then also this one had a new C# features came along. So there are a lot of new features added on the C#9. Well, but for this demo, I will show you the best of the features available for C#9. So these are features or top-level statement in it only setters, records, positional records, and pattern matching enhancement. So these are the key features I will highlight on this demo today to show you the nice and want to add in on your code for next project if you want to move with C#9. So how do you get started with C#9? Well, you have to install your .NET Framework SDK came along the C#9, and also you need a Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code if you want to use open source IDE. Or if you want to get started, you can go to the document and learn what is C#9 to get in depth with more new C# features. So to begin, let's start with top-level statement. Yes, normally top-level statement, you have your namespace, you have a class program, and you have your main entry point here. But with top-level programming, well, everything is disappeared. Only your reference assemblies is on in there. So no namespace, no class encapsulate, no main entry point to run the application. So let me show you how you can do it on your program. So here you have a typical, if you see my screen, I will share my screen, next screen. All right, there we go. So here is my console app, if you see. So I have my namespace, my class program, and my entry points. So I would like to use top-level programming. So you just have to remove all this stuff here. And you have to go straight forward to do, let me do a console write line. And here you will see that I will not get any error because one of the best thing with top-level programming, it's very straightforward and quick. You don't have to worry about encapsulation and starting point of your main. So just be straightforward with that. So you see that I just console my application. And if you want to add a function, right, a method, you just have to do string get, give me a get name. Interpolation. And how do we call it here? Here you go. Now you see that you can define method here on the top level programming, and you don't have to worry about namespace and other so on. So, but one limitation with top level programming currently is you can do it only one file. You can't do it on two more files. So it's just limited with one file. You can do top level programming. So if you don't want to waste your time, just write some long code with bracket and closing bracket. So you just have to be straightforward. You can use top level programming as a new features on C#9. So let's move to our next section. Is, let me go to my slide. So the next section is init only setters. Yes, normally if you want init setters is something that came along if you want to initialize your object and don't and make it as immutability, so don't mutate it. So it's the only thing that replace the setters. It's a replacement of setters if you want to initialize object as immutability of the one initialization and make it full immutability. So it means that it cannot be changed. So let me show you the difference how we use init setters on our project. Let's go on our project here. Let's define our typical properties. So our get set here. Let me show you the difference between get set and init. So string trace get and init. Let me put that just to for a second demo. All right, let me initialize my object here. Very good. So I will assign a name here. Okay, right. So I would like to modify the name here as a Steve name and put it Alex. So we can define it here. So let me declare the variable here. Timo 3, 2. Timo name. let me modify it here. Sorry. That name. See that I can modify the name of that person, so it is mutable. But to prevent mutable and make it immutability, you have to replace the setters with init. So this prevent your object to be mutable. So it's a very nice feature if you want to keep your here. So you see the difference that it is immutability. So you cannot mutate that property. So you can't do that. So very nice to have something that you can keep your object immutability if you want to keep it as it is. So let's move to our next section. So the next section is we are going to use the immutability and records. So, well, what is records? To be clear, records is that it's an inbuilt functionality that used to encapsulate your properties, and it is mostly work with immutability object, but also in mutable object. But most of these are immutability properties. So you can, but using two types of position. So you have positional parameters and standby properties if you want to use record types. So for this, why records is very useful, because one key advantage of record is that you have value equalities, and you have a consistent syntax for non-destructive mutation and also immutability. So if you talk about immutability, that it is very useful if you want to keep if you want a data-centric type, or to be a hash code to remain on the same hash table. So you want to keep your properties and your data type to be on the same hash code. If you want to if you initialize two different objects but with the same stuff. And also value equality, that you can keep your type matching and all properties and value to be matched together, so you keep it as an identity. So very useful. And for the non-destructive mutation, that you can copy an immutable object using something that a with keyword. If you want to copy, if you have something to want to copy an immutable object, you have initialize. If you want to copy one of its properties and assign a new value on that, you can use a with expression. So I will show you on the next demo how you can copy an immutable object once you initialize it from the beginning. All right, let's show you the record difference between the records and our typical class. So here I will copy my object. I will initialize a second value here. I will put something score. I will do a check if demo is equal to demo 2. Let me demo 2. All right. So most of you will say that it's the same. Well, I will show you the difference. It is not the same. Why? Let me copy this one just to full sake. Let's copy else. Right. So most of you will say that it is the same. Well, the surprise is very, very interesting. I will show you how it is not the same. Well, they are not the same because I will show you the difference why it is not the same if you use the classes here. The difference is that it's about the hash code. I will show you the hash code difference. They are not the same type and the same type and also the same hash code. So you will see the difference why it is the same as predicted. Well, let's do the interpolation. And demo refer. Let me use our value. Demo the hash code. All right. What I have to close it here. Seems good. Let me take the demo 2. I will show you the hash code, why it is not the same. demo2, and all right, here we had demo2. So the hash code we define, why it is not the same. So let's run it. You see that the object with the same parameter, the second object inside the same parameter, is the hash code are different. So that's why you the classes keep giving you a different the hash code. So to prevent that, you can use something called records here. So you define your record here. If you put it record, we see that it will be the same. We see the hash code are the same. If see the hash code for object 1 and object 2 are the same. So that's why we use record for those stuff to keep your hash code and the same value are on the hash table if you need a second object with the same value. So that's for the record types. And now we move to the positional records. So positional records, it's very used and straightforward. So positional records, you can define it as an constructor type if you want to do positional records. And what's the best thing with positional records is that once you initialize here on the top here, once you define it, it will automatically assign an init setters on its on the name and address, and also it will provide you a disconstruct method with an out parameter for each positional parameter you have provided on the record declaration. And that's a very nice thing. If you don't want to use typical when you define and properties on an object. So let me show you the positional records here. So to define the positional records, well, very easy. You have to do a typical type constructor if you want to define the positional records. So demo. Let's put string address. All right. Now you see that you have some things. It's not the same argument, so you have to make it like a. When you insert object, you have to do it like if you while doing you have to do the same in when you define a constructor. So let me put James. All right. So this is how you define positional record. And let me take the same value here. All right, this is the positional record. How you initialize an object with using positional record. So the difference between the standard and the positional record is that this is automatically assigned an init, and you can't even mutate it because it is automatically assigned an init setters in the before. So if you see, I can't mutate my object, so it is already defined and init properties. Now I said that we can copy an immutable object using non-destructive mutation. So non-destructive mutation that allow us to copy an immutable object and modify it. So using with keyword. So how can I modify demo2? Replace Jim. Let me remove this one. Let me remove. Let me keep the other stuff here. Here, this one. Right. I've hidden bracket. So here. So how can I copy demo1 into the properties name? I'll replace Jim with Alex. So if you want to replace some things, let me show you. Demo3 is equal to demo dot demo with you have to put name here. Sorry for this one. Right, name, and then you choose Alex. So you can copy. You have copy the immutable object, and then you mutate it using the with keyword. So basically, you have copy an immutable object and you have modified. So this is one thing that you can copy some things that is immutable using the with keyword. It's very useful. So it's destructive mutation. So let me show you here. All right. name Alex. So sorry, it has takes the address. So yeah, the address are supposed to choose it here. So that's a very here Jim. So yeah. All right, let me run it again. Yeah. So address and Alex. So my I have copied this one and replace it with Alex. So that's it for the record types. Now I would like to move something very nice, very useful if you want to do validation and check in depth. So it's something called pattern enhancement, pattern matching. So you have two types of pattern matching. You have relational pattern and logical pattern. So relational, you have your greater is equal to, less than is equal to, less. Very typical pattern. And you have logical pattern is not and or. So those two patterns, you can combine it together to make a complex check if you want some validation in depth to do like check character or check specific code or check specific letter position. You can do it with enhancement pattern matching. So let me do a demo with using switch statement. Same on the screen I did it on the slide. So let's get back to our here. Now let's begin. Let's define a temperature. Temp 23 degree. All right. Now let's define our new temperature. Temperature is equal to temp switch. All right. So now let me start with my first. So I will use the first is a less is equal less 0. So supposed to be freeze. All right. And now I will use a combination with relational pattern and logical pattern together. So before you get started with your pattern, make sure you define your pattern properly, because you will have unreachable pattern if you define other things that is already covered on the top pattern. So make sure to define your pattern very properly. So I will show you the difference if you change a value, if you get out inbound of the pattern. So let me show you. First, let me do a combination between a relational pattern and a logical pattern. So let's take greater 0 and less than equal to 12. Let me show you this one. It is cold. All right. So it is cold. Now I will show you some things. If I do some things like greater 12 or less than 34, it will be mild. So let me put a discard here, something that return null. So you see that my pattern is unreachable because it is already covered here, greater 0 and less than 12. But here you have the pattern is not really matched. So that's why you got unreachable pattern. This is on the down bottom, the pattern is not unreachable. So to prevent that, you have to make sure that you have to do the combination properly and don't put it out of bound range to do your pattern matching. So if I remove this one, it will be the same, but now it is disappeared. Why? Because if it is greater, it is already covered up, you can cover it down, but you don't have an against range within this one. So if you can, it is either greater 12 or you get an exact value 34, it will be mild. Now I have combined the two pattern, N and O, and I have null. So most of this will be the new temperature will be new temperature. Let me show you the new temperature. All right, so the new temperature is here. So you can use it will be a null. So to check a null, how can I do it? So normally people will use if new temp not is equal to null. Well guys, in C#9, you don't have to use this one. Because in C#8, they introduce is. Well, but in C#9, they add something called not. So a typical English language is not. So you have your very simple is not. You can't do it not like that because it will not be matched. So you have to use is first position and second position not. So these two are combined, and you will see that you can give to do a check if some value is not null. So you can use an is not null. So rather using the old way, not equal to null. So is that null? So let me have some things. Let me define it 24. Else, let me add something, a very shorthand. So it will be not null. So to check it. So no, it is. Sorry for this one. I did a mistake. All right, I just forgot to put the is. All right, so my temperature is supposed to be mild. All right, so if I get it out of the range, oh sorry, to stop it, 44. Right. Oh, all right. Yeah, I defined greater than that. So if I remove this one and let it this one, it will be null. Yeah. So this one error. All right, this one. Yeah. So it's null. Well, this is a combination with relational pattern and logical pattern together. If you want to do some in-depth validation by combining this together and make sure you define your pattern, make it as in an order properly. So if you have some complex pattern, you have to make sure you design your check for each using the both combination of relational pattern and original logical pattern. So that came along to our end, our C#9. So thank you for joining the C#9 session, and you can get in depth with new features that I have not covered in that demo. You can get by visiting the document, have a look on that. There are very lot of features, especially for records. You can get an insight about how records are built and what new things can be added on records, and also you have such a new thing, variable coalescence. More and more. So make sure you have a look on the document Microsoft. Have a look and happy coding. So yeah, that's for the demo. And if you have any question, please raise out.
Thank you, Danish, for this interesting presentation. And I am sure that those new features will help our developers out there to boost their productivity and code quality. Now let's see if we have some more questions for you from the audience. Favish, can you please let me know if we have some question? Meanwhile, we have one question in regards to Blazor's PWA. So that goes for Vidush. The question is from Shabazz. What are the challenges of Blazor's in terms of hardware resources? Does it consume more RAM or GPU compared to a normal web application server architecture? So what do you have to answer on this, please?
Yeah, so if we are talking about Blazor WebAssembly, you guys can hear me, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay, so if we are talking about Blazor WebAssembly, it's going to use the classic WebAssembly technology. So it's not as if it has its own engine behind that's going to execute the code or something like that. It's using a standard engine. It's using a standard language. WebAssembly itself, it's an open standard. It defines what's the technical term? I think binary code, a portable binary code, if I'm not mistaken. So it defines how your binary code should be for an executable. So WebAssembly is, I would say, just as an analogy, it's what's going to get executed. And Blazor WebAssembly follows that standard. So that's why we have the Blazor WebAssembly. So if you are using Blazor server side, there you are using C# and you will need everything that's needed on your device, on your server, in order to execute C#. So you would need .NET, you would need everything installed to be able to execute that. But when you are using Blazor WebAssembly, it's using this open standard in terms of how the executable should be. So there is no particular concern in terms of because it's Blazor, is it going to consume more? Is it going to consume less? Where is the effect going to be at? If you want to know, you can look into WebAssembly itself. It's not Blazor that's really going to govern that. Now, just keep in mind that this is an answer I'm giving of experience and my knowledge of Blazor. There might be things that I'm not aware of as well. So it's an interesting thing to research, but to my knowledge, it's not a concern, really.
Thank you, Vidush. Hope this is a quite suitable answer for Shabazz. We have another question for you, Vidush. I can't see the name of the one asking the question, but he said, is Blazor an open source technology?
Blazor .NET Core is open source and Blazor is built. I would say, let me check actually real quick. Yeah, it is. Okay. Blazor is on GitHub. You can have a look at .NET/Blazor on GitHub. It makes sense because .NET Core is an open source technology. Blazor is built on top of .NET Core. So yes, indeed, Blazor is open source. Nice. I believe they have moved the repositories in something just to look at. I do remember they had their own repository, .NET/Blazor, but I believe this repository may have been moved to be integrated directly into .NET Core's repository. It's on GitHub.
Nice, thank you. Next, I have one question for Danish asking if, what is the best way to learn C#?
Oh, yeah, the best way to learn C# is that you just have to try writing the code by yourself or go back to the Microsoft document. But you can do a very simple stuff. You can write small programs using combination with C#, some pattern and statement. So you just have to play with it. Just like your first program you write on university, you just had to adapt it like on C# and you can play it. It's the same and very easy to learn. And most people can learn it very quick in one to 2 weeks. Just to learn the fundamental part of the program, just to learn it. And you can do a console app, play with it, experiment with everything, and do some things that can go beyond on the fundamental. If you have know the base of the C#, you can do design pattern or apply principle based on that. So that's a very things to learn C# by yourself. You can watch YouTube tutorial, but most of you, I recommend people to play with it, just to play, to understand how C# behave, and compared to your typical Java in school you do or on university you can do. So it's a very simple stuff. With console app, you're ready to go. You can play with any stuff.
Nice, Danish, and I also agree with you. So we will move to the next part. So if we don't have any more questions, I would like to thank everyone for attending this event, and stay tuned for our next event, which we will be posting on platforms such as Meetup, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And furthermore, a special thanks to our presenter, Vidush and Danish. Hats off to you both guys. So thank you. Have a great one.
All right.